If a man has a positive relationship to his anima, he is sensitive, he is aware of inner things, he is receptive to the spiritual processes in the depth of the psyche. That is his anima.
The anima in her developed form connects a man to the source of his being. That is, his feelings are individual. They're connected to who he really is. They're not just reactions to outer life.
The unconscious psyche shows its positive face only to us if we go with life, if we don't refuse to live.
It is possible to be so conflict averse that you don't put anything out there of your true self that might lead somebody to want to bump up against you. Yeah. And we call that, in psychoanalysis, when we handle things that way, we call it the false self system. One of the great, realities about men of our day is how terrified they are of women. When the women have some power and some strength and hurl the lance of the woman's truth, her truth, at us.
Today, humanity, as never before, is split into two apparently irreconcilable halves. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner opposite, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. If you're struggling with relating to women, your emotions and life itself, if you're stuck in your head, analyzing from a seemingly safe distance, if you're compulsively avoiding responsibility and action, then this video is meant for you. Who is this man that I'm talking about? He is intelligent, articulate, and sharp, and yet he cannot relate to others. He appears free and detached, but beneath this appearance lies an imprisonment, an anima possession. By anima possession, I mean the unconscious feminine in a man is not related to his conscious self, so it runs his life indirectly through moods, idealization, and paralysis. Our time produces this kind of man in abundance. Many of these men are not only anima possessed, but are also caught in the poor eternus pattern, the eternal youth. This pattern is not without gifts. These men often carry a natural closeness to the unconscious. They are sensitive to meaning, attuned to symbols, drawn to philosophy, spirituality, and depth. They ask meaningful questions and carry a deep longing for answers. But a gift that is not incarnated turns against the one who carries it. What is meant to enrich life becomes what paralyzes it. He is possessed by an inferior, undeveloped feminine presence, a personification of the unconscious, his anima. At the center is a split between higher and lower nature. He binds himself to the higher, spiritual pole, purity, ideals, light, logos. He wants altitude and fears contact. As dreams often show, he prefers to climb mountains and fly, rather than walk in the mud. The lower side is rejected. Earth, shadow, body, eros. The animal layer of his being is denied. The inner reality of instinct, of moods, needs, tenderness and touch. Because he cannot bear the impurity of earthly life, he is dangerously divided. The relating function in him is refused. He replaces relation with reasoning. He becomes the man who explains, analyzes, and argues. He lives in his head and mistakes clarity for life. When a woman comes near him, she isn't interested in his clarity. She wants contact. She desires to feel his presence, to experience a warm connection between their souls. When his eros is absent, she experiences him as cold and unreachable. She experiences his indifference as abandonment, and her despair becomes increasingly apparent. He calls it reason. She calls it feeling. Two psyches are trying to restore contact with opposite strategies. They both are stuck in this archetypal scene. and they unconsciously assume their archetypal opposite roles, the over-rational philosopher and the over-emotional partner. They represent each other's shadow and cannot acknowledge it nor come toward the other. When a man is possessed by an undeveloped anima, she often appears in a white, otherworldly form, lofty, pure, ideal, untouched by dirt. She becomes a goddess, and he becomes her powerless servant. She refuses connection with his instinctual side. She will have nothing to do with his body, his rawness, his shame, or his tenderness. Very often behind this stands a mother complex. The feminine principle is experienced as too holy to be human. In this pattern, a man searches every woman for the perfect mother image, then drops her once she becomes ordinary. He always finds something imperfect in her, and then loses his interest. Psychologically, this is a spiritual bypass, a refuge from earth. And the more he clings to the ideal, the more estranged he becomes from women, nature, and his own body. His development demands what feels, to a son, like betrayal, separation from the sacred image. He needs to cut the umbilical cord that still ties him to the Holy Mother. If he cannot break away and reach the world, he remains an unborn man. We are not blaming the personal mother. It is the psychic configuration that remains, even when the personal mother did her best. He is stuck in the memory of paradise, where needs are met without asking, suffering, or working. He feels entitled. Until he takes the step into earth, his development is arrested. He may be outwardly successful, but inwardly idle. His idleness isn't only laziness. It's often a hidden inflation that protects him from the humiliation of being ordinary. Potential is intoxicating because it asks nothing of you. Reality demands a sacrifice. This anima possession is often supported by a simultaneous father complex. He might have had a father that wasn't present in his life, either physically or emotionally, or a too severe father who overshadowed him as a boy. The father's impatience and lack of blessing block the son's path to identifying with the inner masculine, driving him to remain the mother's son, and thereby preventing him from breaking the primal identification with the inner feminine. And so, he remains in the clutch of the unconscious, and his conscious ego remains weak and undeveloped. So the opposite has no challenge and remains infantile as well. This lack of determination to risk himself makes it impossible for the unconscious to unfold its contents, because for that it needs a strong ego to serve as a vessel. Because he doesn't give himself consciously to let his anima express herself and take part in his life, she is locked in the unconscious. She shapes his destiny through moods, attractions, depressions, and longings. He thinks he is making decisions, but he is possessed by his infantile anima. At bottom, this man fears the inferno of instinctive urges and wild emotions. The son learns an unconscious strategy. Do not risk yourself. Do not expose your own creative act. Stay in critique, in analysis, in the safe realm of reason. He tests and criticizes others' knowledge, but never displays his own. He suspects that if he descends, he will be lost in the darkness of matter. He fears that if he feels, he will drown. That if he loves, he will be betrayed and humiliated. So he chooses the sterile safety of distance. He keeps meeting women who carry his anima and is enchanted by them. He unconsciously demands that she save him and is disappointed again and again when she doesn't. This illusion that he will be saved by the outer woman is the most destructive one. The anima is not a savior figure. She herself is in need of deliverance from an inferior nature. This is the point. The task is not to serve the divine anima, nor to defeat her, but to provide her with the appropriate space and time as a conscious and respected part of the man's being. Chiefly, by developing feeling as a value judgment, as a differentiated capacity to know what matters, what is valuable and trustworthy. Without this capacity, a relationship cannot exist. Here is a daily practice. Once a day, name one feeling, locate it in the body, then ask, what does it want me to value or protect? Just listen, without criticizing the feeling. Sooner or later, life corners him. A relationship breaks, a career collapses. The body starts to speak in a troubling voice, and the question arises, will you remain a spectator, or will you enter time? So what is the way forward? First, a change of attitude. Analysis is not only about talking, it is listening with the inner organ of imagination. The psyche speaks in moods, tones, irrational attractions or repulsions. This is the language of the inner world. If you want to meet the anima consciously, you must become honest about the reality of your emotional life. Differentiation begins with self-knowledge that may shed a humiliating light on you, not in a spiritual posture. Second, discriminating between the personal and the suprapersonal. If you confuse an archetypal anima with your personal inner feminine, you grant her superior power. You make her into a goddess where she should be a familiar function. Dreams may picture the needed separation as the departure or death of a suprapersonal figure. If you meet a woman and she feels divine, perfect, or fate-like, you're in the archetypal space. Find something human in her and acknowledge her incomplete, imperfect personality. She is a person, just like you, with flaws, doubt, and shadow. The proper attitude is twofold: reverence toward the archetypal, firm terms with the personal, not letting her rule, nor ruling her. Third, dissent. In such a case, a man should try to escape from the anima and fight his way down into the world in order to develop by means of his instinctive side. That means work, not only the exciting side of work, when inspiration and fantasy are present, but also the boring, repetitive routine of daily work. Can you stay with that boring side without declaring the work meaningless and giving it up? Pick one craft or physical discipline and do it 3 times a week, non-negotiable. Fourth, reconnecting with the inner masculine. This aspect requires a re-entering into the company of men, where men tell the truth and do not perform. It can be joining a group sport, a men's circle, forming a group of friends, and learning to be again amongst men with an attitude of blessing, non-judgment, and vulnerability. Working on the relationship with the father is an excellent act in this respect. For me, joining a men's circle and working on my relationship with my father did wonders. Fifth, appreciation for nature. Anima work changes a man's relation to nature. It restores a relatedness to the beauty of the natural world. Our overly intellectual time dominates and exploits nature. Our soul is diminished when the conscious stance is one of domination. The soul flourishes in relatedness. Choose and walk the same route weekly, no headphones, and let your senses lead. The goal is to develop enough to love with courage and accept the risk of being hurt, to think without freezing, and to stand on the earth without contempt for its dirt. If you are that man, or if you recognize parts of him in yourself, then the task is clear. Do not worship the white goddess. Do not wait for her to save you. Pay attention to your emotions while differentiating from them. Work and build meaningful and challenging routines. Return to nature. Join a group and enter time. Let Eros slowly, painfully, honestly come back to life in you.
In Jungian psychology, we use the word soul. and usually that word's thought about within a theological context. Could you interpret this dream in such a way that the psychological meaning of the word soul would be clear?
This inner wife is the dreamer's soul. It is his anima. And the anima in a man means also his feeling personality, his sensitivity, his awareness of inner things. If a man has a positive relationship to his anima, he is sensitive, he is aware of inner things, he is receptive to the spiritual processes in the depth of the psyche. That is his anima. The anima is the archetype of life. When the anima is negative, it is the impulse to dream about life and to make wishful fantasies about life instead of living life. Now the anima development is most important for men, and the animus development for women.
The anima in her developed form connects a man to the source of his being. That is, his feelings are individual. They're connected to who he really is. They're not just reactions to outer life.
Before we go into the dream, we have to look at the fact that the main figure of the dream is the wife of the dreamer, but it's not his actual wife. So if somebody dreams of his husband or wife and they look quite differently, they are a different figure, it means the inner wife or the inner husband. In other words, the main animus or anima figure to whom they are, so to speak, always married inwardly. It's the inner marriage and the inner wife.
I'm curious to know what you'll have to say about this dream. It's, I think, the most beautiful dream I ever had. I dreamt that I was walking along beside this enormous river. Swift current and the light was flashing back off the water. Then I looked up a hill, and on top of the hill was a castle. It was surrounded by a moat. I went across the drawbridge into the castle and into a central courtyard, in the center of which was a well, and a woman was sitting on the wall of this well. And she had a ladle, and she lowered the ladle down into the well and held it out to me. I took it and drank the water, and then she dipped again and gave it to me a second time. And then the third time, she repeated the same procedure. And then I sat down on the edge of the well facing her. She had on this gorgeous blue dress, a very, very beautiful woman. And I just had this feeling of peace. And I woke up.
We have seen before that the dream world and the unconscious psyche shows its positive face only to us if we go with life, if we don't refuse to live. We speak of the river often as the flow of life, the flow of time. Time is a river which ends in the ocean of eternity. Life is a river, it begins with a youthful spring and finally ends in the sea of the Godhead, and so on. It's a famous simile for the ever-moving, ever-changing facts of life, which are really the ever-moving changing of our psychic substance which carries us. Think a minute of the strange thing that our ego consciousness is every night blotted out for hours and returns identical the next morning. Why should you not wake up and be somebody else? You are completely continuous yourself. So there's something which carries us through, apparently, which carries our identity through all life. Our body changes its cells. We have practically no old cells in our body left after 7 years, and still we remain ourselves. There's something like an essential psychic substance in us which carries us through in our identity, and that is this mysterious flow of life. That's the river. The anima has the water of life. Most people experience, when they feel well, they say they feel alive. Even if they might have sufferings and difficulties in their life, there are times where people feel alive. And then when people are in a neurotic fix or in some trouble, they say, I'm dead, I'm inwardly dead, I don't live. This shows that being alive is not only a physical fact, it is a psychic fact. Being alive is, we are alive when we feel alive. And what makes us feel alive is the contact with that flow of the unconscious psyche. That's why dreams are so important. Each ladle full of water of life is a dream. That's what a dream is. We get every night, so to speak, a sip of the water of life. And if we understand the dream, then we are vivified. And then we feel alive. We feel in contact with our psychic depth and with our own living substance, and then we subjectively feel that life is flowing, that we are alive. The anima in her developed form is, in man, the capacity for love, in contrast to the power drive. It is loving for love's sake in the highest form.
And where do you see the anima manifest in life?
On a primitive level, it appears in men generally as an element of romantic, unreal, mostly sexual fantasies. You see, for instance, in puberty, when young men are very active and then suddenly they become passive and dreamy and they are not there, and their performance in school goes down tremendously, and one has the feeling, where is that? Where has that young man disappeared? He's in the clutches up to the neck of daydreaming sexual fantasies. In that age, it is a normal transition. But if a man gets stuck indulging in wishful sexual fantasies, he literally falls into the hand of a vampire. He loses his capacity of taking his own life in hand. He loses his willpower. He loses all his male efficiency. And he just daydreams all the time about women and their curves and would-be romantic adventures and so on. He lives in an unreal life. I saw once a man who was 43, still living with his mother, who had never approached a woman. I asked him, what on earth are you doing with your sex? And he gave a secretive smile and didn't confess. He just masturbated widely every night. And then he dreamt that he was in daytime living an ordinary life, but in the nighttime he was living on a luscious island where he had wild sexual adventures with women. That was the fantasy world into which he had disappeared. In a primitive tribe, one would say such a man has been bewitched. He's bewitched.
We would say he's locked into an infantile attitude to life. He's being devoured by the mother. Every man has a girl of his dreams, a divine image of beauty and perfection. Jung called a man's inner woman his anima, which is Latin for soul. She animates life. She can inspire a man or devour him, but whether he likes it or not, it's the male's fate to pursue his soul through life. We're constantly searching for the girl of our dreams. How is a man supposed to make sense out of this incredible number of forms that his femininity takes in his dreams?
The anima has many stages and embraces a great range of psychological facts. Jung once divided it in four: Eve, Helena, Mary, and Sophia, the wisdom of God. Eve would be the biological woman. When she appears as an anima, she would be biological sex, the physical attraction, motherhood, the image of the ordinary attractive female. Helena is on a higher stage. She would represent the hetaira. The Greeks, for instance, developed a type of their form of geishas, the hetaira, cultivated women with whom one had not only a sexual adventure, but with whom one exchanged poetry and philosophical conversations, where the man had also a spiritual companion in the woman, a companionship, together with romantic sex. The next stage is the anima figure in Christianity of the Virgin Mary, which is the highest form of spirituality, but a bit one-sidedly too high up. The Virgin Mary is lacking the dark Eve side of woman, the earthy side of woman. So it is a bit a too lofty ideal. And when the church abolished the Cour d'Amour, they forced the knights to worship the Virgin Mary instead. And at the same time, they began the witch hunting. That means the dark side, the shadow side, or the more biological and the more natural side of the anima is too much excluded from the ideal of the Virgin Mary. And therefore, the fourth stage, the wisdom of God, is, as Jung smilingly quoted, is a come down, because wisdom is not most virtuous spirituality. It is closer to life. When a man knows how to love women and knows how to relate to women, but having wisdom at the same time, the wisdom which protects him from their devouring side. In medieval time, in the so-called French cours d'amour, courts of love, there was the first time in the Western Christian civilization a realization of the anima. There, each knight elected a woman of his choice, which was not his wife, and who represented his beloved anima figure, and he made poems for her, and he did his heroic deeds for her, and he worshipped her like a goddess. And that at the same time, those men grew out of their barbarian warriors' behavior and became cultivated people, men who could really relate to women, men who cultivated their capacity of love, their sensitivity. The anima in her developed form is in man the capacity for love, in contrast to the power drive. It is loving for love's sake in the highest form. This is the time of the Grail legends, of the troubadours, of the story of Tristan and Iseult, and these love traditions. The church didn't like this development because it led to all sorts of complications, and it made people a bit too independent from her. And so it was suppressed. And interestingly enough, when those cours d'amour were suppressed, the witch hunting began. The feminine became negative, and one began to pursue alluring, interesting women as witches, because one had suppressed a beginning development of love life. That is why when we now are confronted with the problem of renewing the relationship between the sexes and finding new forms of relating between men and women, we have to historically go back to the Middle Ages, to that where the problem has been left over in this castle in the moat. There the problem has been deserted and left for a one-sided masculine rational development of the West, and therefore we have to return to that. And for instance, the whole romanticism of the hippie movement was such a first attempt. That's why they were imitated troubadours with music instruments and even revived troubadour music. That was all going back, that now the anima development is most important for men, and the animus development for women.
What does it look like in a man when his femininity begins to develop? When his growing anima begins to separate out from mother? When that cold cat begins to develop a sweet and loving face? When he is no longer interested in his Don Juan escapades? How does his outer attitude change? When the little boy has outgrown the phallic witch and the deadening laws of patriarchy? What happens when he begins to experience his own values in his own being? Being is the feminine principle. Doing is the masculine principle.
One thing a lot of us guys do, and I'll just cop to this for myself, there are a lot of guys that just cut off any of their royal and warrior stuff and just don't show it. They take refuge in the magician sort of lover sector of the psyche. I'm not saying this is you. But I'm just saying that instead of ever developing the ability to be in a confrontation with another person, not just women, but to be in that confrontation without being homicidal, and being in that confrontation without really making oneself suicidal by not protecting oneself. There are a lot of guys who cut the whole active aspects of the male self off in order to survive. And what they will do is what I did for many years is I would just sort of be like the Wizard of Oz, and I would just disappear into that magician. Nothing can enrage a woman more than she's trying to confront the man, trying to engage him, And he sort of, suddenly she notices, this thing sitting here with me is not really him. This is an android. That guy put an android in here to deal with me. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. And often they could not articulate that I just said, but they think this is not a real person. And so then they'll start to escalate their attacks to see if this thing can sustain some punishment, or whether they will crack and the real guy will step out. So a lot of us become opaque, and we are not visible. When I did the Mankind Project weekend, and I was asked to choose a name, an animal name, I chose President Lion, because in so much of my life I have been opaque and not present, not accessible, behind my magician capacities. Oh, you have a problem? I don't understand. So I'm not saying that's you, but I'm saying it is possible to be so conflict averse that you don't put anything out there of your true self that might lead somebody to want to bump up against you. Yeah. And we call that, in psychoanalysis, when we handle things that way, we call it the false self system. Men would rather fight a whole division of enemy tanks than to deal with an enraged woman that they're in an intimate relationship with. In fact, that's why they're so eager to go off to war a lot of the time. Because one of the great, realities about men of our day is how terrified they are of women when the women have some power and some strength and hurl the lance of the woman's truth, her truth, at us. And I've mentioned a couple of times John Lee's work. He's constantly pointing out the way in which we men, when the woman in our life, whoever the most special woman in our life is, begins to criticize, John points out that we almost always start declining in age. And fairly quickly, we're 3 years old. We're just shrinking and terrified. And this at the point, where domestic violence from the male side starts, is when the man loses connection with his grown-up personality. And in the face of the criticism coming from a woman that's got some firepower, which is all of them, when it's coming at him, he is immobilized very often until the point where the rage kicks in, and then he will become often physically violent. So that physical violence comes out of a man who's collapsing into his weakness and self-doubt. So I'll spend a good deal of time with men trying to help them learn that if you're going to maintain a relationship with a woman, and this would be true for gay lovers as well, when your partner starts to come at you, as they inevitably will, with disappointment and displeasure, I try to tell men, you need to have your heart protected here. I'll say, you need to do a little active imagination, visualizing a little Kevlar suit. You know what Kevlar is? That's bulletproof, that you button up in. Because if you leave your heart uncovered when the lances are being thrown with great force and accuracy to get your attention, then you will regress and you will not be able to function cognitively. In other words, you will not be able to listen. Now, we would like to think that all of the lances that are thrown our way are, as Parsifal kind of feels, this is, what do you say, unjust treatment? What is the word?
Unjust.
Yeah.
And God than night.
Yes. And of course, when the salvos start to come, there is a lot of wrong stuff in it. But that's not the most important part of what's in it. If a man is actually going to do his shadow work, then he needs to practice on being able to prevent himself from dying in the face of this onslaught, having his heart completely broken, so he has to end the relationship. I always say to a man, protect your heart or you will end the relationship. You don't protect your heart, you will end the relationship. It may take you a while, depending on how masochistic you are, but you will end the relationship. But protect your heart not so you do not feel anything. You'll be feeling plenty with that Kevlar over your heart. You'll feel plenty. I just don't want you to be in such death pain that you cannot think and listen. A lot of the research now shows that when the fear comes up and the anxiety comes up, the actual brain circuits to the ears shut down. Have you ever thought when people kind of get hot at each other that you've noticed they don't listen? Well, now the neurophysiologists have actually proven that that's the case. So we need to keep you protected enough at your heart level so that your brain does not shut down. And Parsifal at this point then, you know that point you made about the transpersonal knowledge? So here's the feminine aspect of the unconscious being danced out by this crone. And the deepest part of the feminine is going to have the deepest awareness of the male shadow. Just as you will often have more awareness of the woman's shadow than she does. So there's some male part of you that is aware of the woman's shadow, often much more than she is, and often much more than her therapist is aware of it. So the key issue here is being able to continue to listen, because if he cannot listen for the truth in that salvo, even if it's only 10% or 5% of the incoming, then he is not being aided in doing his shadow work and learning where he's blind. So this is really hard thing for men. Here we see this young guy. This is heavy artillery coming at him here from the deep, dark feminine. But a number of you pointed out that this Kundry, she's pretty accurate about a lot of stuff. She is not pulling her punches, though. And I would wonder if any of you've noticed that the female of our species, when angry, will often not hold anything back. In other words, the attack will often be extremely ferocious and listing the litany of the things from the past, as you were saying, which was really right. And so it's a huge male achievement to be able to maintain the critical listening, to listen for the gold in there, in those comments, in that attack, for him to be able to see where is she right about this. It's horrific to me how often the women in my life, while overdoing the attack, have been pointing to things that I desperately needed to know, but could not know at the time. See? So I think there's the gold in this piece of the story for us. We don't have to say, well, boy, she was very balanced in what she said to him. Because the force was not, this was full on. So it's not, well, now I can kick somebody's ass as a martial artist. Now I've got a warrior inflation. Well, you've got an important part. But when you're standing in a relationship with a really angry woman, then we will find out how well your warrior's initiated.